We are just one day away from Utah's Big 12 schedule, date by date, officially being unveiled. What are the key dates to look for? Which matchups should we keep our eye on when they are scheduled? All that and more on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If it's your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, and you can follow our show on X at Locked On Utes. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more. New customers can join today and get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, want to talk about some of the Utes who were in action in NFL Conference Championship this weekend. Also talking about Brant Kuithe being named a way too early All-American by ESPN. But have to start with some big news as it relates to Utah in the Big 12 in this coming season, as this is the week, January 30th. So tomorrow, Max Olson of The Athletic reports that we will see the 16-team 2024 Big 12 schedule released, thus meaning we will get to see who Utah will be playing, see the dates of who Utah will be playing each of their opponents, because we've had the list of who they'll be playing for a while now, but we do not know the dates, which are extremely important. As you all remember from this past season, Utah had a daunting schedule taking on a ton of Pac-12 teams. One of the things that made it extremely challenging because of how good the Pac-12 was last year was a stretch of games that included taking on USC, Oregon, Arizona State, and Washington. Yes, Utah was able to go in and get a win against USC, and USC didn't close the year out they thought, but that was still a team that got some good wins, especially looking back on the Arizona win. They beat the Wildcats right before they really got going, too. So, a nice win by Utah. And hard to win Power 5 games still on the road in college football. Or I guess now we got to start saying Power 4 again. But the scheduling dates absolutely matter. And this is going to be really interesting to see where some of these big games land for Utah. And that is what I want to start when, so what are the key things to look for when we see the official scheduling release? I want to go through some of my biggest things that I will be looking for. And as well, you guys, I would love to hear from you guys in the comments. What do you want to see? The first thing that I want to know about isn't even the rivalry game. I guess I'm excited for that. And we are going to be talking about that in full detail with Jake Hatch on a Locked On Utes and Locked On Big 12 crossover. On tomorrow's show, we'll dive even more into the BYU date. But as it pertains to Utah becoming Big 12 champs in 2024, you have to do that by making the conference championship game. And that happens by obviously having a strong regular season. So I want to know how Utah, when their biggest tests of the regular season are going to fall on what days. For example, I'm very curious to see when the Oklahoma State is going to fall. Is that going to fall for Utah? I think a great scenario would be off a bye week. Maybe they could get healthy, have 2 weeks to prep for the big game. Is it going to come in a stretch where, what I do not want it to have happen to Utah is they have to go to UCF, return to Salt Lake, and then go back out to Stillwater. That is not what I want to see on the schedule. So those are all things that I'm very interested to look for and keep in mind and see how they work out. But seeing the Oklahoma State, which is the toughest game on Utah's schedule right now, just on paper. And then the second toughest schedule on paper for me is the Arizona game when they come to Salt Lake City. Utah, unfortunately, had their home winning streak come to an end, but the only person to beat Utah at home in the last few seasons was Heisman quarterback and soon to be NFL quarterback. Whether or not he'll be a starter remains to be seen, but that being Bo Nix. So Utah's still very tough at home. So I'm very curious to see when the Arizona game is going to be, because those are the two best teams on Utah's schedule. There are other good teams on this schedule, and I am curious to see when Utah plays them too. But the Oklahoma State game and the Arizona game are the two toughest on Utah's schedules. I want to see when those fall. Also, just want to see where are those tough road games going to fall. I want to see with going to Colorado. I know some of you might hear Colorado and be like, oh, they're not going to be good this year. I'm not entirely sure about that. The most important position in college football is quarterback. Anytime you have the best quarterback on the field and just the best quarterback in a game, you will have a chance. Yes, that did not go well for Colorado last year. Didn't go well for USC this past year. We saw too, but USC also beat some teams, Keely, that Arizona team, because of the heroics of Caleb Williams. If the Colorado revamped offensive line can just be a little bit better, they will have a chance to upset Utah in that game because Shedeur Sanders, the likely first overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft, will be under center in that game. And we know he's got some talented receivers and playmakers. So where does that game fall? Does that become a trap game for Utah? Also, speaking of just other interesting road environments, right? Like going down to Houston, another one, UCF. That's Utah's longest trip of the season they have to make. So I'm very curious to see when that is. Sometimes, like, you can, if you have two far road games, as I said, like it's UCF and Oklahoma State, could Utah maybe at that point in the season be overlooking UCF and looking at Oklahoma State, and then they find themselves in the dogfight and that kind of a situation? That doesn't normally happen to Kyle Whittingham's teams, but those are things we've seen happen in college football in general. So it's something to keep in mind. And I'm very curious to see where some of these road games end up for Utah, because it'll be very telling to see how it impacts their schedule, because they are some of those road games can be, it's always tougher to win on the road. I'll just say it like that. Also continuing from there, when is the bye fall? That's always something that's big, is you want to get your bye game at a right time. I did not love where the bye fell for Utah last year, because it was play Oregon State on a Friday, and then you roll into the bye, and then you get Cal coming off the bye. For me personally, I would rather have a tough opponent off the bye, because you get more time to rest up, get healthy for, and then prep for that game, rather than it's like, oh, we have an opponent that we've had this time to get up and get healthy. Just the time to get up and get healthy is a really important thing to me. Hence why I want the bye to be at a time before a big game, rather than in the slew of like, or you come off and it's like, oh, we didn't really need a rest at this point in the season, versus ahead of a big game, you could use a rest. So when is the bye going to be? I am curious to see just another small one. Like, when do all the Pac-12 teams play? Is this going to be a thing where we're going to see the last the last 3 games on Utah's schedule be some combination of Arizona State, and Colorado? I think that's very much so a possibility. So, and that's how I think, and I should say, is it going to be some combination of Arizona State, BYU, Colorado? Because, and no matter what the outcome is, I could very well see being the BYU and Colorado game being later in the season, just proximity wise for those teams. You want to limit the travel for teams later in the year as it goes on. And I just think that makes a lot of geographical sense. So how do those games end up falling? And I teased it a little bit. I am excited to see when the BYU game falls. It's going to be a big game. It's a rivalry game. Utah is better than BYU on paper right now. Anytime you get in a rivalry game, anything's possible. So BYU will be more than capable of beating Utah this coming season. But as I said, just right now on paper, I can't say that the game, again, the best teams on Utah's schedule are clearly Arizona, Oklahoma State, and even a couple of the other teams on there would be better than BYU at this exact moment. But rivalry game, it's still a big deal, a big moment. It would have been higher on this list, but we're just going to talk about it at length tomorrow with Jake Hatch about when we'd like to see it, everything that comes out of that I didn't want to dive too much onto it here. But I'm very excited to see when the schedule drops. Once again, as it has been reported, it is supposed to be dropping on January 30th, based on as the reports came from the Athletics, Max Olson. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll be reacting to the schedule when it drops and giving our takeaways then right here on Locked On Utes. But as we look ahead to next season, one of the key players to everything that Utah wants to accomplish, being not just making the Big 12 championship, winning the Big 12 championship, going to the college football playoff, winning college football playoff games, is of course Brant Kuithe. And Brant Kuithe, even though it is January, getting some way too early All-American love from ESPN. So we have to discuss that in one moment. But first, I want to talk to all of you about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes, in our great friends at eBay Motors. Passions, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride or die every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Alrighty. Talking about Brant Kuithe. Brant Kuithe is, of course, coming back. Between Kuithe, Carson Ryan, and, of course, Landon King, the Utah tight end room is fantastic. I think it's the deepest in the nation, but I'm sure there's some other teams that have some under the radar guys who could pop eventually and maybe get into that realm as well. But anyway, I'm very excited about the tight end room that Utah is going to be repping. But yes, Brant Kuithe has to be the guy that you focus on mainly and be like, when he's healthy and when it's going right, it's going to be special to behold with Brant Kuithe. We're talking about a guy who has 2 seasons over 600 yards at the tight end position. It's crazy that his first season of college football was back in 2018, and here he is about to play in 2024. But injuries, COVID, all that stuff rolled into things. And let me also say this: I think some people don't like that. I'm happy for Brant. I think it's an awesome opportunity with NIL being where it's at, allow these guys to stay in college, to earn money and compete for their schools. And Brant Kuithe we'll see what Brant Kuithe does in the NFL. I hope Brant Kuithe goes on to have a great NFL career. Do I think he can? Yes, but I feel like his best seasons are going to come in college. So that's where I also think it's nice that he has an opportunity to stay, continue to play, and just make things happen with one more year. And he also had, once again, like his last year, what was going to be, he had taken away from him a little bit because of not just this year, the injuries, but in 2022, it looked like he was going to be a special part of that team in the run with him and Dalton Kincaid both balling out. And of course, he suffers the injury and we don't get to see the rest of him during Pac-12 play. We only got a taste of him against Arizona State, and obviously had that great game against Florida where he had 100 yards receiving. But when you have a guy who's had 3 seasons over 200 yards receiving, and in total of his 5 seasons has 2 other ones over 600 yards, you're going to garner a lot of attention. And especially when you've combined to have as many touchdowns as Brant Kuithe has in his collegiate career as well, which he has had 15 touchdowns. So impressive stuff by one of the best tight ends in college football. ESPN put out a way too early All-American list. And while Colston Loveland, the Michigan tight end, which is understandable, right? He finished third on Michigan overall last year with 45 catches, averaging 14.4 yards per catch. I understand based on potential why they think Loveland could be the guy, but if Brant Kuithe gets back to full health, which he's listed as the second team, which is, I think it's right, he should be recognized here, I would have him as number 1. He's the best returning tight end in college football to me. But if you want to say, guy hasn't played college football in basically 2 years by the time he does take an in-game snap, I can understand the hesitation people have in raising him higher on these lists, because even though we know what Brant is capable of when he's healthy, it's not a guarantee he's going to be like that when he comes back. I think because of the time off, the training, all of that, we will see a really good Brant Kuithe. But I understand other people who are like, I need to see it before I believe it. I think that's an understandable thing when you're dealing with a variable as serious as the type of injury Brant Kuithe dealt with. And it's one that kept him out with the rest of the 2022 season and all of the 2023 season. So obviously it's a major injury. And it's something that, yes, he should be back and getting some reps in for spring ball, none of those live, and then he'll be all good to go come the fall. But I understand, once again, the hesitation in having him on a list. But this is a massive honor to Brant Kuithe. And once again, I think he's very much so deserving to be considered already for an All-American spot because of what he did. As we said, Brant Kuithe is a guy who has 2 seasons under his belt in which he had 600 yards. And that is very rare at the collegiate tight end spot. You just don't see a lot of guys do that and return with multiple 600 yards receiving seasons. Because a lot of guys that do that go off to the NFL, right? And Brant Kuithe would have been that guy who did that. But unfortunately, the injury that hurt him made it so it was more difficult to do it, because I just have a hard time. I'm sure Brant, even after this year, would have loved to go off to the NFL maybe. But what's hard about that is that medical, we already mentioned about why it has voters on these awards like nervous to I don't want to make him first team because he's been healthy in a while. How do you think NFL teams are going to feel when they have to make a potential, if they draft a $1 million investment, and even undrafted free agent, $1,000 investment in a guy that they haven't seen play football? So do the job that you are bringing him in to do in basically 2 years by the time he gets into your building. So that's where it becomes very challenging for Brant. And once again, why I think it made a lot of sense for him to come back. But I'm really excited to have Brant back. I think he's a huge part of this offense. Obviously, there's a reason he's a second team All-American. How can you not be fired up to have Brant Kuithe as a member of your football team? Just collegiate tight ends who are as good at route runners as he is, who are as reliable. Even after the catch, he can make some guys miss and make some plays. I forgot he actually has a season under his belt where he had over 100 yards rushing too. That's the kind of things where that was in 2019. Brant Kuithe is a guy who can be used in multiple ways. Andy Ludwig knows how to use him. Chemistry and connection with a quarterback is everything. And we know how good him and Cam Rising have clicked. During Cam's time at Utah, yes, Dalton kind of emerged as his favorite target after Brant went down, but in the 2021 season, Brant Kuithe was Cam's favorite target that year. Just yes, Brant Kuithe, Devon Vele, Dalton still all made plays and made things happen, but Brant was the guy you looked at. And now that Cam is more comfortable in this offense, now that Brant's even will be getting back up and getting healthy, I think Brant is going to throw up some monster numbers. He should be Utah's leader in receiving yards. Dorian Singer maybe, but based on the history that Cam and Brant have, based on what I've seen Brant do in this Utah offense, I feel more optimistic. If I had to say like who's going to be Utah's leading in terms of receiving yardage, I would feel better saying Brant Kuithe than anyone else for a lot of those reasons I listed as well. And Brant, although he's not the biggest guy, he's a tenacious blocker. He always blocks hard. He was never Cole Fotheringham or I'm trying to figure out who else. Or excuse me, when the Utah just last year they brought in the Rhino. We know Logan Kendall came in. Like he's never those guys as a blocker, but he's still a guy who's willing to get after it and do some of the dirty work too. So I think that's a valuable thing for this offense. And the last time we saw him on the field against a SEC team, which he won't be playing SEC teams, but just, that was a Florida. That was still a solid team that upset some teams and did some things that year. He torched them for 100 yards receiving. So all those things are worth keeping in mind. And I definitely think Brant is worthy of being considered an All-American. I expect Brant, if he stays healthy, to be an All-American. I think Brant should easily he had over 600 yards those years. Why can't Brant have over 800 yards in a Cam Rising-led offense where I do think he's going to throw for close to 4,000 yards this coming season. And I know that's something we haven't seen a ton from Utah quarterbacks, but Cam Rising is capable of making those plays with his arm, and just the comfort he has in this offense, the comfort Brant has in this offense. I feel like, and as just in general in college football offenses, you have to pass it more and more. It feels like the explosive element has to be there for teams. That's where I also think it becomes really important. And I do think that Brant Kuithe is just going to have a monster year for Utah. I'm excited to see him tear it up. And I can't wait to look back on this archived episode and go, oh yeah, this is when ESPN nailed it by calling Brant Kuithe an All-American, when we're looking back at the All-Americans from this past season when the 2024 season eventually dropped. So awesome for Brant Kuithe. He's absolutely deserving of this. As for should any other Utah players have been on this list, I don't think so. We love Cam, but I understand having Carson Beck's an interesting decision to be there. But I understand having Beck and Dylan Gabriel and some of that and the numbers that they're going to put up. Obviously, Shedeur Sanders is another guy I think that could be in the running for that too. As I mentioned, I know that Colorado is not great, but Shedeur is incredibly talented. He would have been a top 5 pick probably had he declared this year. He would have been right in the mix with the Jaden Daniels, the Drake Mays. He wouldn't have passed Caleb Williams, but he would be right in there with those guys to me. That's how talented I think Shedeur is based on what I've seen. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, but yeah, no other snubs to me for this on Utah. If these were like the Big 12 awards, then we'd have some snubs, but can't be mad about any of the guys being on here as well. I will say, just like, I know it's way too early list. Keep an eye on Lander Barton for linebacker. I think that's the only one, but I'm not going to have a problem with the guys they have on here. They're absolute studs, monsters, but that's the one I look at and I'm like, just maybe a Zemiah Vaughn. Those are the other ones I'll go to as well. So, and hey, who knows? Maybe even a Dorian Singer. That'd be a tall task, but actually that just won't happen. I'll already talk myself out of that one. Dorian, you're not going to put up those type of receiving numbers in a Utah offense to be a All-American first team or second team probably. But Dorian Singer, I bet will be very good for Utah this season, as we've talked about a lot here, obviously. You know who else is very good at Utah? Marcus Williams was, Alex Whittingham, what he was, just being a part of the staff as a coach back when he was too. He did some good things too. Also, when you're talking about a guy like Mitch Wishnowsky, what he was able to do at Utah as well. So there's a lot of guys when you're talking about this Utah, like the Utah football program, that had ties to the guys in action in the NFL this past conference championship weekend. I want to talk about those Utes in the NFL with you all in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you about our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. Who doesn't love the Super Bowl? The commercials, the halftime show, and of course, the big game itself, Kansas City Chiefs versus the San Francisco 49ers. I think the 49ers might have the best top to bottom roster in the NFL, and the Chiefs clearly have the best player in the NFL and the greatest tight end in NFL history, in my opinion, in Travis Kelce. You know it's going to be a fantastic game. There's going to be tons of big plays, big actions, and now you can get in on that action with FanDuel. FanDuel has so many ways to end your season with a W, or even two, maybe even 3, maybe even more. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 50, but FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and there's so much more. New customers can join today and get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked on to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. It's capital L, capital O, one word, locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Alrighty, as we wrap this one up, talking about some of the Utes in the NFL, we only have 1 or 2 more opportunities to do this because the season is coming to a close. First, the one who was most in action, that is Marcus Williams, finished the game with 3 tackles and a pass defended. Look, Marcus Williams did his job, and the Ravens defense did their job. They held Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs offense scoreless in the second half. Now, if the Chiefs offense at times felt a need to score a little bit more, rather than I felt like also in some situations they were trying to run off the clock, especially late, could they have potentially scored? Maybe. But when the Ravens were in the process of trying to make a comeback, the defense did their job. Marcus Williams is a really talented safety. He did a good job making a number of plays. As we mentioned, had that big pass deflected too. So all big things, all big moments. And nice to see Marcus Williams continue to do his thing for the Ravens. They got Kyle Hamilton back there too. So between the two of them, that is an impeccable safety combination. And it'd be interesting to see what the future holds for Marcus Williams as well, because another great year for him, but unfortunately can't quite make it to the Super Bowl. Now, while Marcus Williams didn't make it to the Super Bowl, someone with Utah ties is going to make it, whether that's Alex Whittingham, who is the son of course, Kyle Whittingham, played in 44 games at Utah, was a 3-time honorable mention for all Pac-12 academic team, and had some different moments playing on special teams, and now is with the Kansas City Chiefs, on the defensive side of the ball. So he's already gotten a couple Super Bowls. He'll have an opportunity to get another one here. And then Mitch Wishnowsky, who did get a little bit of action in the 49ers game, that being only 1 punt, but it was 456 yards, so a booming shot still. One of those two is going to be a Super Bowl champion, and I think it's awesome. If it's Whittingham, it's a repeat one. I expect Coach Whittingham to attend the Super Bowl. I think he did last year when they were in it. I know he did a couple of years ago too, if I remember correctly. So that'll be something interesting to keep an eye on. And then, of course, also going back to Mitch Wishnowsky, it'd be awesome to see him get a ring too. But either way, people with Utah ties are getting a ring, which is always awesome when you are talking about, we are all here because we love Utah football. The biggest game that involves football has members that who were both played for the University of Utah on their staffs and involved in it, which I think is just an incredible thing as just a fan of the game. And even things like, I just called Travis Kelce the greatest tight end in NFL history a second ago. Marcus Williams was the one responsible for checking him and trying to slow him down and do things like that. Like, just a guy that went to the same school I went to, competing with guys in the NFL, doing those things like that. I still think that's incredible. I think it's awesome that those guys are on the biggest stage making plays from our program. I think it's a great thing of what it says about where Utah's at. And I think it's just awesome for these guys that will have an opportunity to get a ring too. So it's going to be fun to see how it all ends up. We are still a solid 2 weeks away from the Super Bowl, basically. So we'll have a lot of time to talk about which of those two Utes is going to get a ring. And there's a lot more to talk about just this week on Locked On Utes, whether it is that Big 12 schedule releasing, whether it is other recruiting news, because Utah did add some signees recently that we need to discuss on this show, and whether it's everything going on in Utah men's and women's basketball, and of course, gymnastics too. If you want all of your Utah athletics coverage, make sure you keep it here at Locked On Utes all week long. Make sure you like and subscribe. Appreciate all of you who support our show every day. And for those of you who just subscribe today, all of you make it so much fun. And I look forward to being back with you talking all things Utah athletics tomorrow. I'll see you then.